Welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood, coming up on the show. In an exclusive interview with Al Arabiya News, Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump says the war on Gaza would never have happened if he was president. This comes as Antony Blinken travels to the region to push for a ceasefire.
I want to see the Middle East get back to peace, and real peace, but a peace that's going to be a lasting peace.
The former president outlining his vision for peace in the Middle East and his confidence in expanding the Abraham Accords if he is elected president. Donald Trump also labelling Joe Biden as incompetent regarding his foreign policies and the counsel he provided to Benjamin Netanyahu as the world waits for Israel's response to Iran's attack on October 1st. And we have the latest from Beirut as Israel carries out airstrikes on bank branches it claims are used by Hezbollah. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. In an interview with Al Arabiya News, former US President Donald Trump has fiercely criticized the Biden administration and his opponent, Democrat presidential nominee Kamala Harris, for their inability to prevent the violent conflicts currently unfolding in Ukraine and the Middle East. In the interview, Donald Trump claiming the ongoing war in Gaza would not have occurred had he been in office, and placed blame on his longtime adversary Iran for the escalations of tensions in both Gaza and Lebanon, describing the resulting destruction as terrible. Let's take a look at that interview now with my colleague Al Arabiya's Washington Bureau Chief Nadia Bilbassy.
First of all, Mr. President, thank you very much for this exclusive interview. First, I guess, to any Arab or international media. We're here in Michigan. I talked to many voters in the swing states, including here. Arab Americans said they support you on the economy, but they want you to stop the war in Gaza and Lebanon. Thousands of civilians are dead, including 70% in Gaza are women and children. If you reach the White House, how are you going to stop this war?
Well, I want to see it all stop. I want to see the Middle East get back to peace, and real peace, but a peace that's going to be a lasting peace. And that's going to happen. I feel really, truly confident. It's going to happen, and I believe it's going to happen soon. And we'll see what happens with the election. I think the election is going to make a big difference. But I was respected over there, and great relationships with so many, including your friend and my friend. But we have great relationships, and we're going to get it done, and it's going to get done properly. But you want a lasting peace. You don't want this to go on every 5 years, every 2 years, every 10 years. You want to have a lasting peace, and we're going to get that done.
Do you believe now with the killing of the Hamas leader and Hezbollah leader, there is a chance for negotiation?
I do. I think they've even suggested it, and not from strength, they've suggested it.
But 1 million people have been forced to leave their homes.
Yes.
Thousands have been killed. And they really believe, some people believe you're the only person who can stop this war because
I think you're right.
Prime Minister Netanyahu listens to you.
Yeah, he does listen to me, and I have a call with him tomorrow. Now, I'm not the president right now. I hope to be soon. But we still have to win a race. We did very well the second time. We won it the first time. We did much better the second time. But a lot of bad things took place. And so, you know, it's so sad to think that if I were president, that war would have never started. You wouldn't have all those dead people, all those, you know, just demolished cities and areas. You wouldn't have had October 7th. That's the most important. You wouldn't have had that. And all of the destruction and the hatred and everything else that followed October 7th. You wouldn't have had Russia attacking Ukraine. You wouldn't have had inflation, frankly, and you wouldn't have had the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, in my opinion. You wouldn't have had the Taliban and Afghanistan and all of the things that are happening over there. So that moment in history was really one of the most embarrassing moments we've ever had. You wouldn't have had it. And I think that would have also kept Putin. I think Putin saw that, and he said they're a paper tiger. We're not a paper tiger at all. We're not a paper tiger. But he has no respect for Biden, and he's got no respect for Kamala. And he went in and did a big, you know, look, the destruction and the death in Ukraine is incredible, far more than people think.
In 2017, on the first trip that you took, on a foreign trip, you went to Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And actually, I traveled with you on that trip. How would you describe the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia? And what kind of role do you think they can play in a crisis in the Middle East?
I think it's fine. Right now, it's when I was president, it was great, with capital letters, G-R-E-A-T, great. And so much respect for the king, so much respect for Mohammed, who's doing so great. I mean, he's really a visionary. He's done things that nobody else would have even thought about. His very long city that he's building, he's really doing something. He's a great guy, and he's respected all over the world. So when you think, I mean, right now it's just okay, it's fine. Biden goes over there and he fist pumps. You don't fist pump. You go over there and you do it right. You shake a hand or something. You hug. You do. But it could never be great with a guy like Biden. Could never be. I don't even think it would be good with Kamala. I don't think it would be good at all. But with me, it will be great. And I have great respect for Saudi Arabia and for many of the other rulers over there, many of the other countries over there. Don't forget, we did the Abraham Accords. It would have been chock full within a year. And I even think, and I make the statement, it sounds foolish, but it's not foolish. I think even Iran would have been in because Iran was desperate to make a deal. They had no money. And Biden allowed them to have $300 billion. They have now $300 billion, $350 billion. And he allowed them back into the game. And I would have done that, but no nuclear weapons. You can't have nuclear weapons.
I'm going to ask you about these 2 points. First, on the Abraham Accord, will you expand it when you come to the White House?
Everyone wants to be in it. They could have done it. I mean, all you need is an order clerk. Everybody wanted to go in. We would have had 12 to 15 countries within a period of, I mean, literally within a period of a year, I think, at the most. They have none. They added none. And everybody respects it. You know, they respect it so much. But look, the framework is there. All they have to do is be inserted. And that'll happen very quickly. If I win, that will be an absolute priority. Just getting everybody in. It's peace in the Middle East. We need it. And it's very important. And it'll happen.
You've been tough on Iran. You took the decision to eliminate Qasem Soleimani. How are you going to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapon?
Well, I'd rather not say that to you, but they won't acquire it. Now, they may get it, if they get it very quickly. I'm not president, so I won't have much to do with that. And I have respect for Iran. I have respect for the people. I know a lot of Iranian people. They're very smart, actually great negotiators, great business people. They're great people. They're very warm people. I wanted to do, as a country, I wanted to do great. Now it's, in its own way, it's probably in danger, maybe more so than they would have thought a month ago, right, with what's happening. I think it's in a lot of danger right now, which is, very bad. I don't want to see people killed. Everyone's being killed in the Middle East. I don't want to see that. But no, I think we would have had something. I think we would have had something very special. We'll still have something, but so much damage has been done to the world, whether it's Ukraine or whether it's large sections of the Middle East. I mean, look at the death and destruction that's taken place. And none of this would have happened if I were president.
What about the Israeli attack? They keep saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to hit Iran. Maybe not necessarily the nuclear facilities, maybe the oil facilities or elsewhere. Would you support that if you were a president?
Well, I think he's going to do what he wants to do, and I think he has to do that. Biden was giving him some very bad... Look, Biden has been historically horrible on foreign policy. Incompetent, I would say. What you do is anything he says, do the opposite, and you'll be brilliant if you do the opposite. But he gave him instructions not to do anything, and Israel was under great danger. They're under much less danger right now than they were 1 month ago. Let's face it. I mean, you saw the attack on October 7th. That was horrible. I've seen tapes that other people haven't seen, and what happened there was horrible. That can't be allowed to happen. But if you think, that would have never happened. So the whole thing wouldn't have happened. That was the problem. And now still you have hostages, but many of them have been killed. And I'm sure many of them are dead. It's a very sad thing. What's going to happen when they find out that there are very few hostages, which is probably what they're going to find out?
You actually told Hamas, you threatened them. You said you have to release these hostages before I reach the White House.
Yeah.
So do you think, what can be done?
Well, I would have said they have to release them immediately. I think if I said it, they would have done it. I think the hostages would have been back home. But I think even early on, I think a lot of those hostages were dead. I think they were dead. I mean, it's a very sad thing. not even believable when you think about it. But I think pretty early on, there were a lot that were gone, and just God rest their souls, to live that way and to spend. And these were largely young people that were having a good time at a festival. Life was a bowl of cherries, right? And they're dead. It's a very sad thing. But it's interesting. I don't know what's going to happen when they find out there are fewer than they thought, and it could be by a staggering number.
What about the destruction and the death of civilians? Do you think that's tolerable price that Israel is doing in Gaza and in Lebanon now?
Oh, the destruction's terrible. The whole thing is terrible. It should have never happened. If October 7th wouldn't happen, which it wouldn't have, because Iran funds it, and Iran had no money. They had no money. They had absolutely no money. And I would have made a deal with them, and they wouldn't have done October 7th. But because they have no respect for Biden, they did it. And then it began. That was like just a terrible thing. But it began because of that, because of October 7th. You certainly can't blame Israel for hitting back, and they hit back hard, much harder than anybody would have thought. And then they send missiles in, and they were all knocked down, 187 missiles. Those missiles were knocked down. And now everybody's waiting for Israel to
retaliate,
make a move. I mean, it's a bad situation. Should have never happened.
Talking about Iran, also I want to ask you about the Houthis. So the US and the UK has formed a military coalition. Do you think it's working? What would you have done differently if you were a president?
Well, number one, somebody's got to stop the ships from being shot out of the water. You have a lot of missiles are going right at ships and hitting them much worse than people know. It's been pretty bad. You can't even use it. That's your main travel lane. They can't use it. They have to find other ways. It's very expensive and really not even doable. Somebody has to make sure that doesn't happen. Absolutely.
How do you see the U.S. Role in the world? How can the U.S. lead in the world?
You have to respect the leader. So Viktor Orban, who's a very strong man and very respected, right, hungry, he said, if Trump were here, none of this would have happened. He said it very strongly. He said it numerous times, actually. He said it 6 months ago. He said it 2 months ago at various reporters and meetings. But he said, and I understand exactly. Look, when I was there, we had no terrorism. We had no wars other than I finished ISIS. I took care of ISIS was gone. It was supposed to take 5 years, maybe 10 years, and I did it in a couple of weeks.
You ordered the killing of Baghdadi as well.
Yeah, I did. Al-Baghdadi was also, I said, you got to get him. He was trying to reform ISIS. But we knocked it out, and we knocked it out hopefully for good. But even that, it can regrow if you don't have somebody in America that's strong. So many people are reliant on the United States. And with me, they have somebody they can rely on. With Biden, he doesn't know he's alive.
And I want to ask you about domestic issue as well. Arab Americans I spoke to, they ally with you. And we heard him today in the mayor of Hamtramck. He said that we are closer to the Republican Party on social issues.
Yeah.
How do you see the issue of transgender that pushed away Arab Americans from the Democrats?
I mean, I was with the mayor. I think the mayor's great. And he's given us his total endorsement. We have a lot of Arab American endorsements, as you know, from representing different countries, but Arab Americans. And he's somebody, I think he's got a lot of future in this country, really. He's amazing. But yeah, he's not for men playing in women's sports. He's not for transgender operations, the transformation or the transition into, a male into a female. He's not into that. And I think for the most part, the Arab world isn't into that. And I'm not into that either. But the radical left is totally into it. I mean, they'll actually take somebody from school without parental consent and do this operation. It's not even believable. Our country is really going bad. This is a very important election.
Fascinating stuff. And our colleague that conducted that interview, Nadia Bilbassy, Washington Bureau Chief for Arabiya, joins us now. Nadia, good to see you. Congratulations. Great interview.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And look, let's talk about the substance of what Mr. Trump said first before I sort of ask my own personal interest questions about the interview itself. But in terms of the comments that he made, was there anything that surprised you there? Anything you haven't heard before?
Yes. Yes, I think when I asked him about Iran, I said the whole world really is anticipating the Israeli attack on Iran. What do you think of that? And he says, well, he has to do what he has to do. So in a way, he's given a green light for the Prime Minister of Israel to go ahead with it. When I asked him that his policy has been tough on Iran, whether it is withdrawing from the agreement or the elimination of Qasem Soleimani, but many people believe that Iran is very close to develop a nuclear weapon. And I said to him, how are you going to stop them? And he said, well, I'm not going to tell you now. So he kind of shied away from giving me details. And he probably will have some idea. It doesn't mean that he doesn't know and he doesn't have the insight of how to stop Iran, but I think that was interesting, the way he said it, because normally the president speaks with that filter, as you know, but certain issues he was hesitant to say it. And of course, on the war in Gaza, the killing of civilians, he showed sympathy. He said that civilians are paying the heaviest price in Lebanon as well. And he told me kind of on camera and off camera that many people believe that really he is the only person who can stop this war because Netanyahu listens to him. And this is what I asked him in one of the questions.
Yeah, and I want to come back to Israel, but on Iran, I agree with you. I think it was really interesting how he was talking about the Biden administration handling of Iran and saying, Trump said, I too would have let them back in the game, but just no nuclear weapons, none of that. Do you get the sense that if he gets back into the White House in this race, that he is going to suddenly flip the switch and become very tough on Iran once again?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's his been... signature policy. He believes that Iran has been causing destabilization in the Middle East, whether through the proxies in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen, even in Syria. And therefore, I think his policy will be so different. But also, he's being very critical of the Obama and Biden administration for doing the deal. He believes the deal was a bad deal. He actually described it as the worst deal ever, because it gives Iran, after 10, 15 years, the right to develop these nuclear weapons, and the sunset clauses will expire by then. And he believes that the money that was released to Iran in return for agreeing on this deal was used to support proxies, that millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, were sent to Hezbollah and to Hamas, and he linked them to the attack now on October 7. He said if Iran was bankrupt and they don't have the money, they won't have the ability to train or to send equipment or weapons to Hezbollah and Hamas in particular.
That's a really powerful message to get through to the American voting public, isn't it? Do you think that's what he was doing there?
Look, I mean, it's a mix. First of all, it was important to do the interview in Michigan because Michigan is one of the swing states and is very important for the domestic audience, Arab Americans in particular, to hear this about the war in Gaza and in Lebanon. As you know, they are very, very unhappy with the way that the Biden-Harris administration dealt with the war in Gaza in particular, the high number of civilians. And I told him 70% of people who were killed were women and children. Therefore, I think the Republican Party and few people who are working with him realize there is an opportunity. So if they can send these messages directly to the Arab audience inside the United States, who are in vital swing states, that might tip the balance in his side, even if they don't vote for Trump. Some people believe that his policy is not as rosy, as promising as it is, because in the end, he has a track record of being supportive of Israel. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He declared the Golan Heights part of Israel, despite the clear violation of international law. But all of this, people believe that he's a strong man. And because he's a strong man, Netanyahu will listen to him. He cannot defy him. And also, he wants to stop wars. He's a man of peace, as he called himself. And he criticized all the wars, including during another Republican president, which is President Bush. Of course, he's talking about the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, look, let's talk about Israel for a second, as I said we would, because it was really interesting when you asked him about the scale of destruction that Israel has caused, not only in Gaza, obviously, but increasingly Lebanon too. And when you posed that to him, he sort of reiterated the position that if it weren't for October the 7th, none of this would have happened. Did you get from that his sort of refusal to kind of really talk about the scale of destruction and the number of civilian casualties that have been caused, that he's sort of nervous to criticize Israel too much, given the election?
I mean, that's a consideration, definitely. I mean, all politicians are very careful of what they say, except for President Trump. I mean, he defies all the norms, and I've been covering the US politics for almost 21 years. They weigh every sentence that they say, but part of his appeal is because he doesn't have filters. He talks to people like he talks to everybody else, like politicians and non-politicians. But I think not necessarily, he might not have the full details. I'm not sure if his team informs him. He doesn't have the apparatus that, for example, President Biden has through the State Department or the Defense Department, where they give him a daily briefing of what's happening in the world. He relies on people around him, and sometimes he doesn't have the full picture. So I think it's a mix of both, that he wanted to be balance in terms of his answers, but also I think he might not be fully informed of every details that me and you see daily on, the Arab screens and what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon.
I mean, and during the interview, he paints himself very much as a savvy political operator, somebody who understands Middle East dynamics, not only in the Levant, but also in the Gulf region as well. And we've heard him sort of speak about his abilities like this before. And he talks about how none of the wars would have happened when he was in office and how he will be able to get peace in the Middle East. I mean, you've studied him basically from close distance there in DC for a long time now, Nadia. Do you think he is as savvy a political operator in the Middle East as he paints himself out to be?
I mean, he was referring to the Abraham Accord. He believes that the Abraham Accord has been a cornerstone of peace in the Middle East, but many people say it was short on the elephant in the room, which is the Palestinian issue. So it was a great step, obviously, to bring all Arab countries together, but normalization would not happen without the Palestinian issues. And I think the Palestinian issues was, for him and for this administration, actually, on the back burner. I mean, the Biden administration did not present anything. I mean, some people say it's a lip service when they talk about two-state solution, because there is no land to have a two-state solution. So for him, is he savvy in knowing all the details? Maybe, but I'm not so sure that he knows all the details, as I say. And therefore, I think he relies on the fact that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who is not playing any role in this campaign, basically delivered what he told the president was peace in the Middle East. And he wanted to expand it. I asked him about that. He said he want to expand it. But now October 7th has changed everything. And I believe a Palestinian state or some kind of determination of the right of the Palestinians cannot be ignored. So it has to go hand in hand with any expansion of any peace treaty with any Arab countries.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like, from what he told you, that he wants to go full throttle on the Abraham Accords if he does get his place back in the White House. Let's talk a little bit more about actually just sitting down with Mr. Trump now. What's it like? What's it like to interview him?
He was very nice. Believe it or not, surprisingly, he was very nice, very understanding. But let me put it into context. I was filming my program, The Swing States. I was in Nevada when they called me and they said the interview was confirmed and it's going to be in Detroit in Michigan. So we had to fly overnight and arrive at 1 a.m. And I was told to be there at 12 because we're going to follow him on all the stops that he was doing in Michigan. So it's tough, as you know, for a TV reporter to be able to do everything. I didn't even have my own clothes with me. I have to buy clothes, I have to do makeup and hair, which is our male colleagues don't need to do that.
Yeah, I understand, Nadia. Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough. And we basically waited for him at the tarmac at Detroit Airport. He came down. He's very open, unlike many other presidents, as compared him to previous ones. He's accessible. So he comes down, he talks to us. And then we followed him to the first stop. He went to Hamtramck. The mayor was there. He talked to the Arab and Muslim community there. Then we moved to another spot where he talked on the round table to other people. And then finally, we agreed the interview is going to be before the rally. And these rallies are, massive with loud music and lots of people around it. So his campaign put me in the backstage on a small room. And we had, of course, American flags, but that's it. And they said one camera only. And I said, come on, guys, we can't do an interview with the former president and, a candidate for the election with one camera. So we negotiated 2 small cameras, and my cameraman was able to operating the 2 cameras. And then when he walks in, he was very friendly. So I said to him, Bloc, we've been waiting for you. And actually, I've been working on this interview for almost 6 years. It happened under these circumstances. It's fine. And he came, he shook my hands, and he was very courteous, very nice. But then I told him, I cannot conduct the interview with the loud noise. And he said, I agree, we cannot do it. So he told his guys, let's find another room. And he promised me to do it after the rally. So after the rally, during the rally, actually, he asked me to come with him and to listen to the people and the message he's sending to them, which I did. But then he had a problem with the mic. The whole power system collapsed for 15 minutes. And I was worried that he might be in a bad mood when I do the interview with him, or he might cancel. But actually, he came back and we conducted the interview almost at 9:30. And he started his day at 6 in the morning. He has the stamina. I can testify to that. And we sat down, we talked more or less all the issues, except that moving to 2 different locations, I lost my questions. I was writing them on a pen and papers, and I lost them. So everything was from my memory and my experience. It was really spontaneous on the spot, but we managed to get all the questions until his guy told me behind, hurry up, we're done. So we had to finish the interview, but he gave us more or less like over 16 minutes, I believe.
A lovely behind-the-scenes look for our viewers there at what goes into these interviews. I think sometimes people imagine that, it's all terribly organised and, quiet rooms and things.
It's not.
Sometimes you just have to react in the moment.
Absolutely.
Did he seem, you're saying he's got stamina, he didn't seem tired. Does he seem at all apprehensive about the election?
Yes, he does, actually. And I've been, as I told you, I came to DC almost 20 years ago during the Bush administration, and then covered Obama and Biden and first Trump administration. And now he always has it, by the way. Like as a pool reporter covering the White House, we often go for a pool spray inside the Oval Office. And normally it's like, 5 minutes maximum. With Trump, sometimes it goes to 1.5 hours. And he goes around asking all the journalists if they have questions. He asks cabinet ministers to speak. And even on the campaign, I even told him, I don't know how you have this energy, because, I myself was really tired. And he said, I don't know how I do it. And it's so true. And he had 2 more phone interviews to do after me with some donors or some other events that he has. So his campaign manager told me they finished at almost midnight. He believes that this is his calling, that the United States cannot survive without him being a president. He thinks this is like we are on a crossroad and it's a very bad time. So he sees himself as a savior. And I believe his supporters, that the one I have been following from almost since 2016, they have been extremely loyal to him. They worship him, actually. I've never seen anything like it before. It's almost like a cult. They really follow him. They believe in him. But the election is not determined by the followers, as you know. The election is determined by the independent voters, and he needs to reach out to these voters to see if he can sway them and make their mind to vote for him or not. But this election is going to be really hard because we cannot predict. It's neck to neck, as you know. It's very, 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 very close. And the swing states will decide, the turnout will decide this election, who's going to be in the White House.
And of course, Michigan, all important in that with the Arab American community there. Just finally, you're talking about how you got the interview and, his stamina, because there have been reports sort of trodden down by his team saying, oh, no, it's rubbish, that he has been pulling out of interviews because he is, quote unquote, exhausted. His team has rubbished that. But let's think about him sitting down with you for Al Arabiya News, because it was actually Barack Obama, his first interview he did when he took office as president was with Al Arabiya News. And why is it you think the US presidents view Al Arabiya as an important platform to be seen on?
I think Al Arabiya is viewed as a professional station, as a moderate station, as a station who project views as they are. And also it's a personal effort. Most of the time, I myself interviewed President Bush almost 6 times, I believe. I had the exit interview with President Obama. I always say that we are not soldiers in a battle. You can ask whatever question, tough or easy, but it has to be respectful, and you have to have in mind the audience, what the audience want to hear. So I think they take that into consideration of when they ask certain reporters to interview the president of the United States, but it's also the station. The station has Al Arabiya has a great reputation in the United States. It's perceived as fair. And I myself, I always say that, I ask tough questions at the White House, and probably you've been seeing that in the briefing, and they still call upon me every single day. And the reason is because they believe that maybe we don't have the bias that other stations have. And we aspire always, we're not perfect, but we always aspire to be closer to truth and to give the audience what I believe as a journalist that we should stick to, which is facts.
Nadia Bilbassy, our Washington bureau chief for Al Arabiya. It's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for reaction to this, I'm joined now by Arron David Miller, who served as an advisor to Republican and Democratic Secretaries of State on US policy on the Middle East and the Arab-Israel peace process. So good to see you again. And I just want to start by discussing our colleague's interview with presidential candidate Donald Trump, former president as well. This was done by our Washington bureau chief, Nadia Bilbassy, yesterday in Michigan, over the weekend. And fascinating stuff. The question I want to ask to you is, why do you think Mr. Trump thinks it's important to speak to Arab American audiences and also all audiences through Al Arabiya at the moment?
Not sure about the specific requests for your platform for Al Arabiya, but clearly, we're 2 weeks away from arguably, maybe not arguably, one of the most consequential elections in modern American history. So, in a close election that could be determined by under 100,000 votes, every vote helps. And I'm sure that the former president is trying to build on the anger and animosity that has been building now for a year on the part of many Arab Americans toward the Biden administration, and perhaps specifically toward Kamala Harris. I don't think she deserves it. I think there are reasons that the administration's behaved the way it did, but clearly those reasons are not acceptable and understandable to any number of constituencies in the United States, and certainly not in the region.
In the interview, Mr. Trump said that if he was in office, the wars wouldn't have been happening. He would be able to end the wars quicker than anybody else. And he would be tougher on Iran than the Biden administration have been, and that the Abraham Accords would be extremely widened if he gets back in office. Is any of that new to you?
Well, there are 3 points you made. Number one, so I'm to assume that Hamas was thinking first and foremost about who was in the White House when they launched their attack on October 7th? Number one, I don't think so. The notion that Mr. Trump believes that chaos in the world is somehow lessened when he's in office and it increases when he's not is more coincidence than a willful analysis of Donald Trump's leadership. Number two, as far as Iran's concerned, let's be very clear. Donald Trump did, in fact, increase the pressure on Iran through the policy of maximum sanctions, but he withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iranian Nuclear Accord, which I think was a fundamental mistake. That was a flawed, but I would argue, functional agreement. And in September 2019, a guy who said he was going to be tough on Iran and defend American interests allowed Iranian cruise missiles and drones to attack Saudi Arabia and to against two critically important oil producing facilities. So that's it on the second point. As far as the Abraham Accords are concerned, look, the fact that they've survived and that there was serious talk about normalization, about expanding them, although I think the Saudis don't consider themselves, they do not want to consider themselves part of the Abraham Accord process. They want to do one better and extract from the United States any number of benefits as a consequence or as an incentive to normalize relations with Israel. You know, it's hard to imagine in the wake of October 7, and you have three ongoing confrontations, one between Israel and Hamas, one between Israel and Hezbollah, and we have a looming, imminent confrontation between Israel and Iran that you're likely to see a dramatic expansion of Israel's relations with any Arab country. So I think all of this, I think is much, these 3 points I think are arguably very debatable, at least the way Mr. Trump has portrayed them and analyzed them.
As you pointed out there, the moment when we consider diplomatic processes, which of course a lot of people around the world want to see happening, Israel's got to set 3 fronts to settle: Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran itself. Now, there are various attempts going on at all of those at the moment. So let's talk about today. Anthony Blinken is going to be in Israel. And it will be his 11th visit since October 7th to the region to try and iron things out from a US foreign policy point of view. You've said before in a separate interview that Secretaries of State should travel to a region in crisis, but they should avoid the risk of eventually becoming part of the political furniture. Do you think that's a risk for Blinken?
Not a risk anymore. I think it's essentially a reality. I mean, the Secretary of State is essentially tethered to a part of the region that lacks in my judgment, the basic element for any successful American diplomacy, and that's leadership. I mean, with or without Yahya Sinwar, the reality is that neither Benjamin Netanyahu or the leader of Hamas, or I would say the putative leader of Hamas, whoever it is, whether it's Sinwar's younger brother or Khalil al-Hayya acting as head of the external leadership while someone involved in the military campaign, maybe it will be Mohammed Sinwar, essentially tries to command and control what's left of Hamas's organized military structure. You need leadership in order for anything to change in this region. And anytime there has been anything that has been positive, whether it was with respect to Arab-Israeli peacemaking or even the Abraham Accords, you had leaders who were willing to take risks. And I would submit to you that in this corner of the Middle East, you have 4 individuals. Well, Hamas is now leaderless. Hezbollah is now leaderless. You've got the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and you've got Benjamin Netanyahu. This group of leaders and whoever becomes head of Hamas and Hezbollah do not inspire, in my judgment, a lot of confidence in, number one, de-escalating the current situation, let alone moving towards something that you and I would consider an alternative pathway for regional prosperity, security, and stability. So, I mean, I think the Secretary's trapped in a sort of hopeless set of circumstances. On one hand, within 2 weeks, you have one of the most consequential elections in modern American history. And on the other hand, you are on the cusp of a major Israeli strike against Iran. The U.S. does not have a lot of leverage in this particular situation. I think the best thing that the Secretary could do is to press the Israelis very hard on the one area where, in fact, the administration has been able to get results from time to time, and that is the horrible humanitarian catastrophe that still exists in Gaza, particularly in northern Gaza. where the Israelis are pursuing a policy, can't imagine it's going to work to move 300,000 people to farther south into areas like Al-Mawasi, where I don't think the humanitarian situation is good at all. Not access to potable water, sanitation, medical care. So that's what he can do. And I think the Israelis probably would be somewhat responsive. Other than that, hard to imagine anything that you and I would consider a meaningful breakthrough on this or any trip in the future.
Just finally, I'm glad you brought up Yahya Sinwar, because we haven't spoken since the news of his killing last week by Israeli forces. Do you think people, and we can understand optimistically why some people were quick to jump to the conclusion that the announcement of his death would somehow lead to the end of the war in Gaza?
I think perhaps it's understandable we get caught up in the breathless headlines without thinking clearly about the trend lines. Look, this is a multifaceted, multi-front conflict, which has gone on for a year. You don't have the leadership in any peak quarter of it in order to turn it into a better situation. So the death of Yahya Sinwar, however significant it may be for the future of Hamas, it's in the future. I don't see it, it's not a game changer, it's not a watershed, and it's not an inflection point. And that's actually quite sad and quite tragic. I'll come back to it again. Leadership is the sine qua non for anything that is going to happen of consequence in this region going forward, and we don't have it.
Arron David Miller, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, for reaction to this, I'm joined by the former Deputy Assistant to Donald Trump and former Senior Director for Counterterrorism on the National Security Council, Kash Patel. Sir, good to speak to you. And just to set the scene, I believe you're somewhere on the campaign at the moment. Is that right?
It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm on the Trump team bus tour in Pennsylvania, so I apologize for the gyrations, but we're going to do the best we can.
Okay, well, that's some good context. And what's the energy been like in Pennsylvania so far, given it is a key swing state?
Yeah, today's the last day to register to vote and vote early here in Pennsylvania. And the crowd at the first stop is huge, and people are showing up from all diverse backgrounds. And we're also hearing from a lot of people who have never participated in the electoral process. So it's really been energizing to see.
Great. Now, one of the reasons we wanted to speak to you was about Trump's appearance actually in Michigan prior to Pennsylvania, because he sat down with one of our colleagues, our Washington bureau chief on Al Arabiya, to talk at large about his campaign, but also, U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, his view on Israel, the situation in Gaza and Lebanon, what he would do about it if he was in office. How important is Michigan and the Arab American community to Mr. Trump?
Well, look, President Trump will speak for himself. I'll just add on the sides, he's taken the time to go to these communities and speak to them, not because he wants to divide America. You're talking to an Indian American who's just in Michigan himself with multiple UFC champions and gold medalists hosting an Arab American event for President Trump. It's all about unity, and President Trump is unifying this campaign by going out there and talking to the communities in this country that have been left behind or ignored or have been tried to be bought during a political cycle. And I think President Trump is brilliant for going over there and going to every corner in every county and telling them that it is an America First movement for all Americans, not just certain sectors of the economy or certain sectors of this country. And so I think he's showing them his economic policy. And I'm a son of a legal immigrant, and I'm talking to Arab Americans all over the country, and they're saying they want legal immigration. And that's what President Trump stands for.
And we understand from speaking to people on the campaign trail all the way along it that, obviously the economy and immigration, illegal immigration being the main points a lot of this election is going to be fought on. But we are interested to know from you how much voters are thinking about the situation in the Middle East, because whilst it might seem far away, I'll reference one caller into NPR from Michigan was quoted saying, if I'm going to be a one-issue voter and that issue is genocide, I'm okay with that. So do you think that could swing things?
Look, normally in presidential election cycles, it's the economy, the economy, the economy. But on this one, I think tantamount to the economy is national security. And that involves the border and, of course, the never-ending wars. We have to remind folks that Kamala Harris and Biden gave Iran $7 billion 14 ago, and they launched World War III. And yes, I do call it that. When 1,200 people have been killed and Americans are still being held hostage along with other nationals from around the world. So I do think it's a big issue, and it is a single issue for many American Israelis and for many people who just want peace around the country and around the world. And they're asking, how do we get it? The Biden-Harris administration has had a year to bring that war to end, not to mention the one in the Ukraine. But all they keep doing is sending more and more money overseas. So I think President Trump's America First approach, again, to ending those wars, because he will have the wasta to sit down with Putin and Zelensky. He will have the wasta and the wherewithal to prioritize intelligence collection and not have sensitive leaks like we just saw about our allies Israel from the U.S. intel community to the media. He will do his work in the White House like he did before, securing and wiping out terrorists, bringing home hostages, and ending the forever wars. And I think he's speaking directly to those single-issue voters.
Do you think Mr. Trump truly understands the complexities of the Middle East enough to actually find a solution to the peace issue?
Well, I mean, I think the simplest answer to that is every president has tried for Middle East peace, and President Trump was the only one to get it done. So I do believe he understands the complexities. I do believe he can go out and talk to not just allies, but adversaries. He sat down with leaders of foreign adversaries multiple occasions to bring about that peace. And he achieved it in the Middle East, and he handed it off to the Biden administration. And he suffocated the mullahs in Iran, not just with sanctions, but also by taking out key leadership like Soleimani and other moves like bringing hostages home here back to the United States of America without shedding blood. So I think he understands the global complexity surrounding not just Middle East peace, but peace in Africa, peace in Southeast Asia. And of course, we're going to need to reestablish and secure peace in Afghanistan since Al-Qaeda is on the rise again because Tehran is funding them.
And obviously you have experience and specialism in counterterrorism, which is why you're an interesting angle on this to speak to. When you say blood being shed, it's interesting when you think about the way an American voter might view the Middle East and how it impacts them as an American citizen, given memories, of course, of previous wars, the invasion of Iraq, the messy pullout from Afghanistan. I mean, is it an issue that when you're a presidential candidate, it's very difficult to touch?
It's very, very difficult to touch and easy to ignore, and that's what Kamala Harris is doing. And what President Trump has done is taken it head on. Look, I've served as Chief of Staff to the Department of Defense and running our no-fail mission, the greatest job I've ever had for President Trump. And the hardest thing you ever have to do is serve at a dignified flight transfer and bring home the fallen to their families for their final resting place and bury the dead in Arlington. And I've only known one commander-in-chief who has truly been dedicated to ending those forever wars and stopping that bloodshed. I've seen that man operate in the Oval Office to ensure that is done, whether it is authorizing rescue operations or authorizing special forces to take out key structures of leadership for Al-Qaeda and other senior terrorists, because that's what brings about an end to war, along with the economic sanctions and getting our global allies around the world to do things like stop trading with Iran, for example. And so I do believe he understands it. And I do believe he's the only one that can bring us back to peace because he's the only president that didn't launch another world war in modern history. He actually wound us out of that.
Let's just talk about where we are in the race while we've still got you. And I understand, you know, it's difficult conditions there. You're on the bus and it's moving a bit. But I just want to ask you about some of the latest headlines out of the election race, because latest polling showing just no real change, a real statistical deadlock state. Both candidates, not really any movement there across the state. The only big sort of push at the moment seems to have been that Kamala Harris's campaign has outraised Donald Trump's by 3-1 in September. Why has Mr. Trump found it so hard to raise funds this time around?
Well, I think I would disagree a little bit. I think President Trump has done a wonderful job raising money from wide swaths of American socioeconomic status and bringing in a whole different level of people into politics at the $10, $15, $22 level. And Kamala Harris's donors are George Soros and Hollywood and the billionaires that continue to fund them. And so that's fine. They can do that. For me, that's another talking point on the campaign trail that I can say they're funded by the wealthy and they're talking to us as if they want to wipe out wealth in America. And I'm going out there on the campaign trail and I'm walking into barbershops and McDonald's, as you see President Trump doing, and seeing everyday Americans who say, I don't care about my background, whether I'm white, black, or brown. I'm not only supporting President Trump because of his American First agenda, I'm going to give him a few bucks. And I think that's more powerful than billionaires donating endless amounts of money to Kamala Harris. And I think President Trump's done a superb job reaching out and asking Americans to help in any way they can, and they're responding.
The latest out of the Kamala Harris camp is an interview that she gave where she said that Donald Trump demeans the office of president. What do you say to that?
Well, I've been in that office of the presidency with him, and I can tell you my personal experience is absolutely not. I've seen that man light the Diva for Diwali, for Hindus. I've seen him bring in all sorts of ethnic backgrounds to celebrate their virtues and their holidays, along with celebrating America. That's not demeaning the office. I've seen that man bring loved ones of his fallen for United States service members into the office and give them a hug. That's not demeaning the office. And I've seen that man execute orders and sign legislation that takes care of our veterans, that wipes out narco traffickers, that ends CCP trafficking of fentanyl and stops child sex trafficking. None of that to me is demeaning the Oval Office. What's demeaning is when you have a vice president on the campaign trail who is asked if she would do anything differently and has a chance to apologize to the victims of illegal immigrant crimes like Lake and Riley, and she takes the international media center and says no to both those questions. That is wildly demeaning and offensive.
Just finally, Kash, the question on a lot of people's lips is if Mr. Trump doesn't win the election in 2 weeks' time, will he accept the loss?
The only thing we're planning for is working our tails off till November 5th and winning through early voting and registering voters and being on the Team Trump tour and seeing President Trump elected on November 5th. I am not looking past it at all. And he'll speak for himself, but I think he's all in to win.
Speaking to us from the Trump campaign bus, Kash Patel, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
To Lebanon now, where Israel has conducted airstrikes against a Lebanese association linked to Hezbollah, accusing it of financing the group's weapons. The strikes targeted Al-Qad al-Hassan branches in Nadia and Tyre, as well as other facilities used by Hezbollah in Beirut and southern Lebanon, with the aim of disrupting the group's funding sources. Al-Qad al-Hassan is a Hezbollah-affiliated financial firm that provides microcredit in Lebanon, where the banking system has collapsed due to the ongoing economic crisis. Now, this does come as Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Nadia told Al Arabiya News in an exclusive interview on Sunday night that the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 is the only way to end the conflict that's ravaging his country. Meanwhile, following a meeting with Lebanon House Speaker in Beirut, US Special Envoy Amos Hochstein says Lebanon and Israel's commitment to UN Resolution 1701 is not enough. But the US is working on a solution to end the conflict permanently. This follows reports on Sunday that Israel has provided the United States with a document outlining its conditions for a diplomatic solution to end the war in Lebanon, according to 2 US officials and 2 Israeli officials. Well, for reaction to this, I'm joined by the Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc, Michel Helou. Thank you for making time to speak to us again. And let's start with these latest strikes on Beirut and elsewhere in Lebanon, of course, but specifically Beirut, where you are. What have they been like?
The night was extremely hard. Let's be clear, although these institutions, these branches, these banking, let's say parallel banking branches dependent on Hezbollah, first of all, they are extremely spread across the territory in Beirut and the southern suburb, in the south of Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, but also in other areas. And second, they are in the end civilian institutions. So the strikes last night were extremely harsh. I live right above the southern suburb of Beirut. So basically, there's been like 2 hours from 10 p.m. until 1 a.m. where the Israeli army did at least 12 airstrikes on the southern suburb. It was extremely difficult. It was extremely, let's say, traumatizing, I think, for a lot of the population. And I'm not even talking about those who actually live in those areas who were forced to leave. We've seen scenes of people escaping from Beirut around midnight with nowhere to go. So it is really, really hard to go through that. And even if this institution, Al-Qad al-Hassan, is a parallel illegal banking institution linked to Hezbollah, I think that the fact that Israel is striking it also shows that Israel really doesn't make any difference between military and civilian targets. And I think this is obviously a huge problem. The reality is that what's happening now is that Israel is actually targeting the whole Hezbollah environment, which in the end extends to the whole Shia community in Lebanon. And this shows how far Israel is ready to go in order to reach its goals, which is to try and shift the public opinion, specifically the Shia public opinion, against Hezbollah by punishing them.
I appreciate that, as you've just described, that Al-Qadr al-Hassan, this financing network, is a bit sort of not rudimentary, because obviously it's quite widespread and quite established, but it is microfinancing. It's very much on the street level. But are you surprised that Israel decided to attack that financing institution in this way by kind of dropping bombs, as opposed to any other means, sort of more intelligence-based means?
I think one can only be surprised by the extent of the attacks that Israel is carrying out on Lebanon. It's been, we're talking about now more than 25,000 residential units that have been destroyed. That's more than 4,000 to 5,000 buildings that have been leveled down. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that have nowhere to go back to, within the 1.2 plus million displaced people. So definitely it is quite shocking to see those methods. Now, if you listen to the general discourse of the Israeli generals, I mean, it could still fit in, because they basically say, we're ready to do anything to reach our goals. So it's part of their strategy, and they're applying it, and they're going till the end, and unfortunately in total impunity. And that does not mean that we support Hezbollah. I think that a lot of Lebanese are very critical of Hezbollah, are actually opposing clearly Hezbollah's behavior, its dependence on Iran, what it has done to Lebanon and to our sovereignty. But yet they would not support Israelis' bombardments on such a wide array of targets, civilian and military, in Lebanon.
Was there a sense, Michel, a feeling last week with the announcement of the killing of Yahya Sinwar, of course, over in Gaza, but that might have the effect of undoing a lot of this, well, not undoing it, but de-escalating the tensions, seeing an end in sight for the kind of military bombardment you saw last night?
Well, if you listen to the Israelis themselves, first and foremost Netanyahu, but also his Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, you get a very clear sense that things are not over at all, because their target has never been solely Hamas. Their target is pretty clear, that there's a mass displacement plan, forcible displacement plan in northern Gaza, to try and push all the Palestinians from northern Gaza to the south of the Strip. And that's not, that's without even talking about the larger political plan, which could be a forcible displacement from the whole Strip, plus an annexation of the West Bank, etc. So what I'm saying is just that if you listen to them, clearly Sinwar is not the end of the game, and clearly the war will keep going. Now, I would have hoped that we would get a leadership also on the Palestinian side that would be more ready to negotiate. But the reality is that the amount of atrocities that Israel has carried out in Gaza, and in the West Bank as well, and in Lebanon recently, and the extremism that its leaders are going to, will, I believe, only push Hamas to go further and further, also to a more radical position as well. So I think few people expect to get a proper, solution, diplomatic solution and ceasefire through these methods.
But certainly efforts being made by the United States, who've sent not only Anthony Blinken into Israel, but US Envoy Amos Hochstein into Beirut today. And that's what we led into our discussion with you, talking about the fact that he basically said this UN Resolution 1701, which de-escalated the conflict in 2006 between Israel and Hezbollah. People can't just make commitments to that anymore. There needs to be more than commitments, because it didn't survive this time around. What do you say to that?
Well, I believe that now what we need is very clear. We need a proper diplomatic plan. I'm talking about Lebanon here, in order to reach a ceasefire. And for that, we need concessions on both sides, both on the Israeli side and on the Iranian side. We need pressure on both actors. in order to stop the fighting, stop the killing, because their country is being destroyed. But we need more than that. We need not only make sure that the fighting stops, like it happened in 2006 when they imposed Resolution 1701, but we actually need to make sure that this war not only stops, but also is the last war we have. And that means really applying the resolutions till the end. And that means breaking the cycle of violence through coming back to the state and to having a proper long-term stable solution. What happened in 2006 was basically an incomplete solution where Resolution 1701 that requested all military forces outside from the Lebanese army and the UN Blue Helmets to be removed from the southern part of Lebanon, and also requested from the Israeli army to stop its violation on Lebanon's sovereignty. None of the parties applied, neither Hezbollah in Lebanon nor the Israelis. So now what we need is to have a proper, stronger resolution that will make sure that on the one hand, Israel doesn't occupy any single square meter of our land and does not violate neither our space, neither our borders, neither our ground, basically the southern villages, but also that Hezbollah applies the resolutions entirely. The only way we can reach a proper and stable deal is to make sure everyone in Lebanon comes back to the state, to the institutions, and to the army. And this will only work if Iran is forced to basically stop its interference in our politics. We cannot afford any more Iranian interference and violations of our sovereignty by Iran either.
Do you think it's possible? Do you think it's possible to get to a point where there is, as the caretaker Prime Minister has described it, new understandings of the Resolution 1701? Do you think Hezbollah will, meet all of the commitments of that, and Israel will as well around that contested region?
I think it is possible, but it will definitely require first a lot of maturity from our own political class and a lot of courage from everyone in Lebanon. And from all the political actors, including Hezbollah, that will be forced to make very strong concessions. It will require also big public support in Lebanon, public opinion support, but also it will require a very strong and fair positioning from the international community that will have to increase the pressure massively on Netanyahu on the one hand and on the Iranians on the other hand. And until now, we haven't seen the pressure neither on the one nor on the other. So I think we're not there yet, but it is definitely possible because I think it's in the interest of all players in the end, at least the Lebanese and the international community.
I mean, let's talk about this document that's been leaked. This is according to reports in Axios, which is Israel's conditions apparently for negotiating an end to the war in Lebanon. And of course, this is leaks, reports. We don't know for sure whether it is the case, but citing 2 US officials and 2 Israeli officials, the Israel conditions would be that they would have armed forces be allowed to engage in active enforcement to make sure that Hezbollah do not rearm and rebuild military infrastructure close to the border. And they also want Air Force to have freedom of operation in Lebanese airspace. That's the Israeli Air Force. What does all that mean in reality?
Look, I think it's pretty clear Israel is starting with putting the bar extremely high, basically saying we want the right to do whatever we want. I mean, this is how we understand it. It's a pretty blurry proposition, but it says 2 main things. One, in terms of airspace, we want to have the control over the airspace. And 2, in terms of the land, we want to be able to do the incursions that we want and to enforce ourselves on our own the 1701 resolution. So to do whatever we want to do to expel Hezbollah forces from the south. So that basically means there is little to no Lebanese sovereignty. So definitely it's something that is completely unacceptable from a Lebanese perspective. And I think we should be very clear on that. Now, the only positive thing in all of that is that there is a start of diplomatic negotiation, but clearly this is unacceptable for Lebanon.
And the Arab League also chiming in, the Secretary General of that league saying that for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon, he wants Israel's prompt withdrawal from any Lebanese territories it has occupied or entered. Do you think that will lead to anything?
I hope so. I think the Arabs have a very important role to play, be the Arab League or all the GCC states and other Arab countries. I think that what we need to reach is a solid settlement that basically says, on the one hand, Israel stops the invasion, stops the bombardments, and basically withdraws from our territory and stops the air violations. And on the other hand, Hezbollah becomes a Lebanese party like all the other Lebanese parties. So that means that we stop the Iranian funding and the Iranian interference in Lebanese politics and the Iranian support to Hezbollah to make sure that, on the other hand, the Lebanese army is being strengthened and the Lebanese army is able to take on its full role in order to defend the South and to be present across the whole territory. The only solution for us is to regain our sovereignty. The problem we've been having for the last 30 to 40 years is that the Lebanese state had no sovereignty. It had no decision over war and peace in our country. Actually, that's even the case since 1969, when the first militias came and settled in southern Lebanon. We need to exit this era, and the decision of war and peace can only be within the hands of the state. That will require a very strong diplomatic support, both from the Arab world and from the West, in order to be applied.
Just one final point, Michel, as well, the Arab League Secretary General saying of the idea that Hezbollah could be destroyed and removed from Lebanon, quote, "You cannot destroy an idea." What do you say to that?
I think it's very true, and it's the same actually with Hamas. This is what the Israelis have been trying to do. It doesn't work. Now, what should be done is stop the fighting and get to a political understanding, but a very strong and clear political understanding. It's not because you cannot destroy an idea, and I think it's very clear. And in the end, trying to destroy this idea will end up destroying our country. Before Hezbollah will be destroyed, Lebanon is already paying the price. The economy is down by 10% already now. There's hundreds of thousands of Lebanese that are leaving the country, and more than 2,500 people killed, more than 11,000 injured people, 1.2 million displaced. As I said, dozens of thousands of residential units destroyed. So Lebanon cannot afford all of that, and it will be destroyed way before Hezbollah is destroyed. The only thing we can reach to is an agreement where Hezbollah actually comes back, like all of the political forces behind the state, that Iran stops its interference, that the Lebanese state regains its full sovereignty on the borders, on the financing of the political parties, on the military, on diplomacy, on the port and the airport, and all sorts of traffics inside and outside the country. And I think this is the only solution. And there we will need the Arab League as well as all our allies.
Michel Helou, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party National Bloc, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News Today. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.